welcome back. I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to a Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we get the pleasure of driving the 2018 Porsche 911 GT3 Touring. It's a 991.2 generation. It has a naturally aspirated 4-liter flat six producing 500 horsepower sent all to the rear wheels. And the beauty of the Touring is that it is wingless. This car is inspired by the iconic Porsche 911R, which was made in limited numbers and caused quite a stir in the aftermarket because that was a $185,000 car that ended up selling aftermarket for around $800,000 in some cases. Porsche then realized they had a star on their hands. They needed to do two things. Number one was bring back the manual gearbox to the GT3, which had been eliminated in the 991.1 generation. And then once they had the beautiful manual winged GT3, they realized they needed to give us a wingless version. And that's where this sleek, clever Touring comes out. It started at $146,000. This one is tastefully upgraded with only a few options, and its MSRP was $164,000. Today, they're selling for over $200,000, and if this was a PTS car, man, oh man, does the market go crazy. We've got steel brakes, so we're not trying to be some hot boy out with our carbon ceramics. I actually really like the steel brakes, and rear steering. So this has an incredible turning radius, and it feels smaller and more nimble at low speeds and really long and stable at high speeds. Gluing us to the road, up front we've got a 245 section tire, and in the rear to handle all that torque and power, a 305 section tire. They came with two different tires. You didn't know what you were getting. You were either going to get a Cup 2 from Michelin or you're going to get a Dunlop. This one is on the Dunlops. People were oddly tribal about whether they got the Michelin or the Dunlop, and it seemed like those who got the Michelins felt like they were superior to those who got the Dunlops. Inside, we've got contrast red stitching along the doors and the dashboard. It's the perfect size vehicle. The 991 is my favorite generation after 997 for water-cooled cars, and these seats are the 18-way adjustables. So yes, you could get yourself the carbon buckets, and those are a beautiful seat, but I do think that there's something to be said about having the cozy, comfy seat in your GT3 Touring. It sort of makes sense because it's supposed to be the car that you really use. Fly under the radar, not necessarily your track toy, although it could be. You still get 9,000 RPM to play with. In the rear, no kinder seats, just a parcel shelf and gorgeous Alcantara headliner. Let's take a look under the hood. That's kind of a trick because there is nothing under the hood of this rear engine other than a plaque telling you GT3 4-liter, so you know that there's 9,000 RPMs of revs to play with. There is a spoiler that pops up around 75 miles an hour. You've got a button in there that you can press as well to put it up. And up front, in our frunk, of course, no engine, but loads of storage space with our deep cavernous cubby in here. So you can do the job on a weekend trip or just using this as a daily driver, which I would hope people would do because it really is a great car. The iconic silhouette of a 911 never gets old, and it never will, and I think the 991 body lines capture it perfectly. In the rear, there's no giant wing, which makes this a little more subtle, and it doesn't look like a boy racer. You have the center exhaust to let you know that it is definitely a GT3, but let's jump in, take it for a ride, and make this 4-liter sing. To start our GT3, we've got a key fob here. We have our left ignition, clutch in, jumps to life with a little bit of a pop at the end of that startup. And then over here, we've got some buttons. We've got our sport button, our suspension button, our traction buttons, our rear spoiler, our exhaust. So this is normal mode. Sounds fantastic, but gets a little gruntier and a little louder with that sport exhaust button. And then we have a nose lift, which is super helpful because the front overhang of this car is a little bit long and it makes it easier to navigate a speed bump or steep driveway. On our passenger side, we get our cup holders, which I always thought these worked pretty well, but people sure do like to complain about those. We'll put our parking brake down by pulling. I almost always do it the wrong way first. You can immediately tell that this is not a non-GT 911. This clutch is aggressive, it's tactile, It's grabby. Let's see how she gets off the line. She is quick. Oof. God, I love this car. In sport mode, you get auto blip shifting, so that way you don't have to do the rev matching yourself if you don't want to, although I do recommend doing the rev matching yourself a bit in this car just because it's such a playful, exciting engine that being in more control of it is wonderful. And that's why the Touring only comes in the 6-speed manual, no PDK option. Brakes feel like a block of wood. You're just pushing harder on that block of wood. The pedal doesn't move that much. That can be a little alarming when you first get in these cars. You think, uh-oh, nothing's happening. I thought this was a Porsche. It's supposed to have brakes. No, no, no. You just got to give it some force. Let it know. Usually when I'm driving a 9,000 RPM engine, it's little and torqueless. This is 4 liters and it boogies. It's kind of a wild thing because you're staring at that tachometer like, oh my goodness, we've got more. We've got more. And it's really fun to just watch that needle climb. An analog needle at that, not just some LCD display telling me what's going on. There's nothing fancy. It still just lets you drive it like a car. Of course there's great tech in it, but the driver experience and interface all feels really analog and old school. Oof, over some of these bumps. This is a stiff car. Lets you bob into traffic anywhere you want. It's the right size, there's tons of visibility, and there's torque. The shifter is magical. Porsche knows how to make a manual, especially in their GT cars. The 7-speed manual that comes in the non-GT cars, I have to say, leaves a little bit to be desired. They feel a little more rubbery. This is like race car, but streetable race car, not obnoxious, and that's important. That's a very important distinction because if you make a street car to race car, you're not going to want to drive it. You're going to look like a goofball. It's going to be clunky and awkward, and it won't have air conditioning. And like, thank God I have air conditioning in here right now. It's 90 degrees outside. Driving dynamics, very 911 rear engine feeling, because you get on that power, you start to push that front axle. We got loads of room to play on that on-ramp because of the runoff, but like, your right foot matters in these cars. If you apply throttle in a corner, the front end's gonna wash away. If you release throttle in a corner, the rear end's gonna come around a little bit. And that's the beauty of these cars. That's why we love them so much, because they're controllable and you can dance with them. It makes you feel so engaged, and it occurs even at like somewhat lower speeds. You don't need to be on the absolute ragged edge of grip to experience the beauty of 911 dynamic handling. I love the layout of this cabin. I can reach everything, which, all right, while we're sitting in traffic, that's like an important point I'd like to make. In 992, I can't reach the window switches with my left hand. They're like back here. It's very uncomfortable. You've got to have T-Rex arms to get to those buttons. I actually always find myself hitting those window switches with my right hand in 992. In 991, I think ergonomically these were superior. The suspension is stiff. You need to be a little bit aware of what's going on, and you've got some overhang on the front, so you can't take too many liberties with steep driveways, but you've got the nose lift to help. There's no fooling that this is a GT3. Just because it doesn't have the big wing on the back does not mean it's just a casual Carrera. So make no mistake, if you're buying one of these and you're thinking like, oh, well, it looks kind of normal, and maybe people did. I don't know. I think everyone knew these were special, but they look a little normal. But I'll tell you, the second you get in and start driving it, you're fully aware that this is all GT3. 991 was also a generation in which the E-Pass, electric power assisted steering, came into play in the 911. And I swear some journalists made their entire careers around making fun of this, or being mad about it, or, you know, wishing they had the hydraulic system of the past. They talked more about this steering than they did about losing the Metzger engine, which is a little nuts. But I find it today in 2024 to be perfectly fine, perfectly good. It's weighted nicely. I still know what's going on with the front wheels. You would have thought that you couldn't feel what was going on with the car by the reviews of the past. That's just not the case. This is a very nice car to drive, and I love the steering. Sure, you lose a little bit of granularity and texture, but it's not as bad as they say. particularly great about this car is it revs higher than the 911R. That RS engine didn't rev to 9 grand. And then you can just tuck in behind ordinary traffic, shut it down, and call it a day. The GT3 Touring is maybe my favorite modern car. I think it's not ostentatious, but it's one of those if you know cars. The right attention is garnered by its appearance, and even if you don't have some flashy PTS color, this one's black, it's still special because it's a wingless GT3. This manual transmission, while of course it will be slower around a racetrack than the PDK, it's just a joy to row these gears. It's the same reason I really like my Civic Type R, because it's got a great manual gearbox and it's something that I like to engage with. I am not a manual stan. I love driving a new GT3 with a PDK gearbox or a Turbo S. I think those are phenomenal cars. However, if it's my money and I've got to have it in my garage, I do think that this is the way. It brings more joy to me, and it might bring more joy to you. It's easy enough to drive that you could just take it to work and do normal things in it. You can go on road trips and probably be pretty shameless about putting miles on it, honestly, because these are stout powertrains. They do not blow up. They just run. Probably gonna burn a little oil, but that's just normal flat six things. And it may be uncouth to talk finances, but I've got 4 cars. I've got my E39 M5, my 88 911 3.2 Carrera, my Civic Type R, and my Lexus GX 460. If I consolidated to one car, maybe a daily driver like my GX, sold the rest, what's left over is pretty much a 991.2 GT3 Touring. And this drive has given me a lot to think about. What would you do? Do you keep 4 cars and have a car for every occasion and some special things, or do you just go down to 2 cars that are relatively low maintenance, a 911 GT3 and a GX 460, and live your life and stack those miles? So let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks to Bond Group for tossing me the keys to this gem. It's beautiful, it's perfect, I love it. It's gonna go on Bring a Trailer. Maybe I'll scoop it before it goes, because I just want it. I want to bring it home. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. Now this has a McPherson strut up front. The new ones finally have double wishbones, which make it turn a lot better. I mean, those cars are pretty magical, but they're surgical. And there's something beautiful about that and incredibly fast about them, but it's all the old school things about these 911s that give them that charm. It's its imperfections, or it's the things that you have to be in charge of and manage that make these such driver's cars. So even though the 992 is a faster car, I still think I prefer driving this. And the philosophy behind the GT3 Touring gives me hope that there will be a non-limited edition version of the Dakar, the new rally Porsche. They made 2,500 of the Dakars, and I think everyone loves it. Everyone wants to see it. And just like the 911R bred a wingless manual GT3, I think hopefully the Dakar will breed some cheaper, more ubiquitous variant of a rally Porsche.